1 year ago, the world ended. The infection spread faster than anyone could stop it. Cities collapsed. Governments disappeared. Billions of people turned into something no longer human. The dead now walk the earth. Most survivors tried to hide in bunkers, ships, or mountains. But nowhere was truly safe. Except maybe one place, far out in the ocean, where the infected could not easily reach. An abandoned offshore oil rig. This is the story of how I survived 365 days there. During the zombie apocalypse. When the world ended, the ocean was the only place left to run. Cities had already fallen. Highways were graveyards of abandoned cars. Every town I passed through smelled like smoke, rot, and death. The infection had spread faster than anyone predicted. Governments collapsed in weeks. The military tried to fight back, but bullets only slowed them down. Nothing stopped them for long. The zombies were everywhere. I spent the first month surviving by moving constantly. Never staying in one place longer than a night. Gas stations, farmhouses, empty stores, anything that had a door I could lock. But every day the hordes grew bigger. One night, while hiding inside a small fishing harbor, I saw something that changed everything. Far out in the dark water, barely visible through the fog, stood the silhouette of a massive offshore oil rig. A giant metal fortress in the middle of the sea. If I could reach it, maybe I could survive. The harbor was silent except for the waves hitting the docks. Most of the boats were gone, stolen or destroyed during the chaos. But near the end of the pier I found a small fishing boat. Old, but the engine looked intact. The key was still inside. I didn't waste a second. Starting the engine felt like firing a gun in the quiet night. The sound echoed across the water. My heart started pounding as I pushed the boat away from the dock. Then I heard them. Growls. Dozens of them. Shapes started moving along the harbor road. Zombies were pouring out of the dark streets, drawn by the engine noise. I pushed the throttle forward. The boat roared to life and shot into the black water just as the first zombies reached the dock. Some of them fell into the ocean trying to grab the boat. Within minutes the harbor disappeared behind me. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to hope. The oil rig grew larger as I approached. Floodlights were still mounted on its massive towers, but none of them were on. The structure looked abandoned, dark, silent. Huge steel legs rose out of the ocean like something from another world. Climbing onto the rig wasn't easy. The waves slammed the boat against the metal supports while I searched for a ladder. Finally I found an old maintenance ladder hanging just above the waterline. I tied the boat as best as I could and started climbing. The wind was stronger up there, howling through the steel structure. Every step echoed across the empty platform. When I finally pulled myself onto the main deck, I realized just how massive the rig really was. Helipads, cranes, living quarters, storage containers. It was like a floating industrial city. But there was one question I couldn't stop thinking about. Was I really alone up here? Or had something else reached the rig before me? I gripped my flashlight tighter and slowly stepped into the darkness. Day one on the oil rig had just begun. Morning on the oil rig felt unreal. For the first time in months, I woke up without the distant sounds of screaming, gunfire, or the moans of the infected echoing through ruined streets. All I could hear was the ocean. Endless waves crashing against the massive steel legs beneath the platform. The rig stood high above the water like a giant metal island. From the helipad, the view stretched for miles in every direction. Nothing but grey sea and dark clouds on the horizon. No ships, no helicopters, no signs of life, just silence. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe I had finally found a safe place. But believing something in this new world was dangerous. I needed to make sure the rig was really empty. The platform was enormous, bigger than I realized the night before. Thick pipes ran across the deck like metal veins. Rusted cranes towered above stacks of cargo containers. The living quarters sat on the far side of the rig, a large blocky structure with rows of dark windows. If anything had made it onto the rig before me, it would probably be inside there. I grabbed a wrench from the boat's toolbox, my flashlight, and started moving carefully across the platform. Every step echoed loudly on the metal floor. The wind howled between the towers of pipes and machinery, making the entire structure groan and creak like it was alive. I hated that sound, because every time the wind stopped, the silence felt even worse. The entrance to the living quarters was a heavy steel door. It was already slightly open. That made my stomach tighten. Slowly, I pushed it open. The hallway inside smelled stale, like old oil and dust. Emergency lights flickered weakly on the ceiling, powered by some backup battery system that was still barely alive. Rooms lined both sides of the corridor. Dorm rooms, offices, storage rooms. Everything looked abandoned. Beds were unmade. Coffee mugs sat on tables. Papers were scattered across the floor like the workers had left in a hurry. Something had happened here, but whatever it was, it had happened months ago. I searched room after room. No bodies, no blood, no signs of the infected. By midday I had checked most of the upper living area. The rig really did seem empty. I even found a small kitchen and pantry. Most of the food was gone or expired, but a few sealed cans were still good. Enough for a few days at least. Then I heard it, a loud metallic clang. It echoed from somewhere deep below the platform. I froze. The sound had come from the lower levels of the rig, the industrial section where the drilling machinery and maintenance tunnels were located. For several seconds I stood completely still, listening. The wind blew, the pipes creaked, and then, nothing. Maybe it was just the rig shifting with the waves. Maybe, but something in my gut told me that wasn't the truth. The lower levels of the oil rig were dark. Completely dark. No windows, no emergency lights, just endless metal corridors beneath the platform. If something had climbed onto the rig from the ocean, that's exactly where it would hide. I stared down the staircase leading into the darkness. I had two choices: ignore the sound, and pretend I was safe, or go down there and find out the truth. I tightened my grip on the wrench and slowly started descending the stairs. Day 2 on the oil rig, and already the silence didn't feel so safe anymore. The staircase down to the lower deck felt like descending into the belly of a giant metal beast. Each step echoed loudly through the narrow stairwell. The deeper I went, the darker it became. The weak emergency lights from the upper level disappeared quickly, swallowed by the thick shadows below. Soon, the only light left was my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing rusted pipes, metal grates, and thick cables running along the walls. Everything smelled like oil, salt water, and old machinery. This was the industrial heart of the oil rig. Huge drilling equipment surrounded the main chamber. Massive hydraulic arms stood frozen in place like the skeletons of some mechanical monster. The machines had clearly been shut down for a long time. The silence down here was different. Heavier. Like the air itself didn't want to move. I stepped slowly across the grated floor, keeping the wrench raised in one hand and the flashlight in the other. Every few seconds I stopped and listened. Nothing. Just the distant rumble of waves crashing far below. I began checking the maintenance corridors one by one. Most of them led to storage rooms filled with tools, spare parts, and old equipment. Some doors were locked, others hung open. Everything looked abandoned. But then I noticed something strange. Wet footprints. I froze. They weren't human footprints exactly. They looked wrong. Sloppy, uneven, like someone had been dragging their feet while walking through seawater. And they were fresh. Drops of water still glistened on the metal floor. The footprints led deeper into the rig. My heart started pounding. That meant only one thing. Something had climbed up from the ocean. Slowly, I followed the trail. The prints moved through a narrow hallway toward a large maintenance chamber near the base of one of the rig's support legs. The door to the room was half open, swaying slightly with the movement of the platform. Creak. The metal hinge groaned softly. I pushed the door open a little more and aimed the flashlight inside. The beam revealed tools scattered across the floor, a broken ladder, and thick ropes hanging from the ceiling. Then the light moved to the far corner of the room. And I saw it. A body. Or what used to be a body. The figure was lying twisted against the wall, clothes soaked with seawater. Its skin was pale and swollen, like it had been floating in the ocean for days. My stomach turned. A drowned zombie. For a second I hoped it was truly dead. Then its head snapped toward the light. Its eyes opened. The creature let out a wet, choking growl and began dragging itself across the floor toward me. Instinct took over. I slammed the door shut and threw my shoulder against it just as the zombie hit the other side. Thud. The entire door shook. The creature scratched and slammed against the metal, growling like an animal trapped in a cage. But it wasn't alone. From deeper inside the dark room, I heard another sound. Then another. More wet footsteps. More growling. My blood ran cold. There were more of them down here. Somehow, zombies had made it onto the oil rig. And they were hiding beneath my feet the entire time. The door rattled violently as the creature continued trying to break through. I backed away slowly, realizing something terrifying. If they were climbing up the support legs from the ocean, this rig wasn't a fortress. It was a trap, and I had just locked myself inside it. The first few days on the oil rig were spent preparing for something I now knew was coming. Zombies had reached the platform from the ocean. That meant the rig wasn't isolated like I had hoped. The steel legs that held the entire structure above the water also acted like giant ladders. If a floating body got caught against them, eventually something could climb. Or crawl. Or be pushed up by the waves. I had to make the rig safer. The first thing I did was block the lower deck access points. There were several staircases and ladders connecting the industrial levels to the main platform. I dragged heavy toolboxes, metal crates, and anything else I could find to create barriers. It wouldn't stop them forever, but it would slow them down. Then I began exploring the rest of the rig more carefully. On the west side of the platform I found a storage container filled with old emergency supplies. Most of it was useless, but there were a few things that felt like winning the lottery. A flare gun, several heavy flashlights, and a small portable radio. The radio only produced static, but I kept it anyway. Sometimes, late at night, I turned it on just in case a signal appeared. So far, nothing. By the end of the week, I had chosen the safest place on the rig to live. The control room. It sat high above the main deck, surrounded by thick windows and steel doors. From there I could see almost the entire platform. If anything moved, I would notice it. At least that was the plan. But on the night of day 7, something happened that made me realize how fragile my situation really was. The storm arrived after midnight. Strong winds slammed into the rig, shaking the entire structure. Rain hammered against the windows like thousands of tiny bullets. The ocean below turned into a violent black chaos of crashing waves. I couldn't sleep. The whole rig groaned and creaked under the pressure of the storm. Then I heard a sound. A dull metallic clang from somewhere below. At first I thought it was just the wind. But then it came again. Clang, clang, clang. Slow, heavy, like something hitting metal again and again. I grabbed my flashlight and moved toward the control room window that faced the support legs of the rig. Lightning flashed across the sky. For one brief second, the entire structure below me lit up in bright white light. And that's when I saw them. Bodies. Dozens of them. The storm waves had pushed floating corpses against the massive steel legs of the oil rig. The water smashed them into the metal over and over again like broken dolls. Some of them stayed there, caught between the support beams. Then another lightning strike lit up the ocean. And one of the bodies moved. Slowly, it lifted its head. Then another, and another. The dead were waking up. One zombie began dragging itself upward along the steel beams, using broken fingers and twisted arms to climb higher. Then another one started climbing. And another. My chest tightened as I realized what was happening. The storm was delivering them to the rig. Like the ocean itself was feeding the infected directly to my door. The first zombie reached the lower platform railing. It pulled itself over the edge and collapsed onto the metal deck. Then it slowly began to stand. Behind it, more hands were reaching up from the darkness. By morning, the oil rig wouldn't be empty anymore. And I was the only living thing on it. I barely slept that night. The storm kept raging, and every few minutes lightning lit up the ocean around the oil rig. Each flash showed the same terrifying scene, more bodies smashing against the steel legs below. And some of them were climbing. By early morning I heard the first footsteps on the main deck. Slow, dragging, unmistakable. The zombies had made it up. I grabbed the wrench, the flare gun, and slowly opened the door of the control room. The wind had calmed a little, but the rain still fell in heavy sheets across the platform. The deck looked empty at first. Then I saw movement. Near the crane tower, a soaked figure staggered between the pipes. Its clothes were torn, skin pale and bloated from seawater. It moved slowly, like its body was still waking up after drifting in the ocean. A drowned zombie. Then another one appeared behind it. Then another. My heart sank. There were at least 6 of them already on the platform. And that was just the ones I could see. The rig suddenly felt much smaller. I moved quietly along the upper walkway, trying not to make noise. The wind helped hide my footsteps as I slipped toward the stairwell that led down to the main deck. If I could push them back toward the edge, maybe the ocean would finish the job. I waited until the closest zombie wandered near the railing. Then I rushed forward. The wrench slammed into its skull with a loud metallic crack. The creature collapsed instantly, its body dropping heavily onto the wet deck. The noise attracted the others. 3 zombies turned toward me at the same time. The dead eyes locked onto me, and they began stumbling forward. I backed away quickly. The first one lunged. I swung the wrench again. The blow smashed its jaw sideways, but it kept coming. I kicked it hard in the chest and it stumbled backward into the railing. The second zombie grabbed my arm. Its grip was unbelievably strong. Panic surged through me as its rotten mouth opened inches from my face. Without thinking, I fired the flare gun. The red flare exploded from the barrel with a deafening blast and slammed directly into the creature's chest. Flames erupted instantly. The zombie staggered backward, burning like a walking torch. It slammed into the third infected, and both of them tumbled over the railing into the raging ocean below. I stood there breathing heavily as the remaining zombies slowly approached. My hands were shaking. The flare gun had only a few shots left. The wrench was covered in blood. But the real problem became clear when I looked around the platform. More figures were emerging from the darkness, climbing over railings, dragging themselves across the deck. The storm had brought far more infected than I realized. The oil rig wasn't just a shelter anymore. It had become a battlefield. And I was badly outnumbered. As the first group of zombies began surrounding the control tower staircase, a terrifying thought crossed my mind. If they blocked the upper levels, I would be trapped up there, with no escape, and the ocean full of the dead waiting below. Day 8 on the oil rig, and the fight for survival had truly begun. The zombies didn't disappear after that first night. They kept coming, not in huge hordes like in the cities, but slowly, one by one, carried by the ocean. Every day I would find a new body somewhere on the rig. Sometimes they were still trapped against the support legs below. Other times they had already managed to climb onto the lower decks. The ocean was feeding the rig with the dead. If I didn't take control of the platform, eventually the infected would outnumber me. So I made a decision. I was going to clear the oil rig. The next few days were brutal. I moved through the platform section by section, checking every corner, every corridor, every stairwell. The wrench became my main weapon. Sometimes I used pipes, sometimes heavy tools from the maintenance rooms. It was exhausting work, but slowly, the number of zombies on the deck began to drop. By day 12, I had cleared most of the main platform. That was when I discovered something that could finally give me a real advantage. It happened while searching the fuel storage area near the drilling equipment. The room was filled with large industrial tanks connected to thick hoses and valves. Old warning signs were still attached to the walls. Flammable. That's when the idea hit me. Fire. I grabbed one of the smaller fuel containers and carried it back toward the section of the platform where the zombies usually appeared after climbing up from the lower decks. The plan was simple. Create a trap. That night, just after sunset, I poured a trail of fuel across the metal deck near the base of one of the staircases. The smell was strong enough to burn my nose. Then I waited. The ocean was calm that evening, but the sky was dark with heavy clouds. A storm was probably coming again. Around midnight I heard the first sound. A wet thud from below. Then the slow dragging footsteps I had learned to recognize. A zombie climbed onto the platform and began wandering across the deck. Then another followed, and another. 5 of them slowly moved across the fuel-covered metal, unaware of the trap beneath their feet. I took out the flare gun. Aiming carefully, I fired. The flare struck the fuel trail and instantly ignited it. Whoosh! A wall of fire raced across the deck like an explosion of red light. Flames surrounded the zombies before they even realized what was happening. Their bodies caught fire immediately. The creatures staggered and screamed, horrible, broken sounds, as the flames consumed them. One burning zombie ran straight toward the railing and fell into the ocean. Another collapsed onto the metal floor, twitching as the fire destroyed what was left of its body. Within seconds the platform was silent again. The smell of smoke and burned flesh filled the air. But something about the fire worried me. The flames had spread faster than I expected. Much faster. I quickly grabbed a fire extinguisher from the nearby wall and started putting out the remaining fire before it could reach the fuel tanks. If the rig caught fire completely, I would lose the only safe place left in the ocean. After the flames died down, I stood alone on the dark platform, staring at the black water below. The trap had worked, but it also taught me something important. This oil rig was full of dangerous machines, fuel, and chemicals. One mistake, one accident, and the entire structure could turn into a floating bomb. But the ocean still looked calm that night. Too calm, because somewhere out there in the darkness, something much bigger than a few zombies was moving toward the rig. And I had no idea it was coming. The storm returned without warning. One moment the ocean was calm, the next, the sky turned black. Wind slammed into the oil rig with violent force, shaking the entire structure. The waves grew fast, rising higher and higher until they crashed against the steel legs like explosions. I had seen storms before, but this one felt different. Stronger, angrier. I secured everything I could on the upper platform and locked myself inside the control room. The windows rattled under the pressure of the wind, and the sound of the storm was deafening. Then it happened. A massive boom echoed through the rig. The entire platform shook. Not like before. This wasn't wind. Something had hit the rig. Hard. I rushed to the window and looked down, trying to see through the chaos of rain and darkness. Another lightning strike lit up the ocean. And for a split second, I saw it. A large object slammed against one of the support legs. Wood. Broken. Floating. A boat. A medium-sized fishing boat had been thrown by the storm directly into the rig. It was now wedged between the steel beams below, crashing against them with every wave. The impact must have been what I felt. But then something else caught my eye. Movement. Inside the boat. My heart stopped. Another flash of lightning. This time I saw clearly. A person. Someone was inside the wreck. Alive. I didn't think. I just moved. Grabbing a rope and my flashlight, I ran out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked me off my feet as I made my way to the nearest access ladder. Climbing down was insane. The metal was slippery, the wind was screaming, and the waves were crashing just meters below me. One wrong step and I was dead. When I reached the lower level, the boat was right there, smashing violently against the rig. "Hey!" I shouted over the storm. No answer. I jumped onto the wreck as it slammed against the steel again. Pain shot through my legs, but I ignored it and climbed toward the cabin. Inside, I found him. A man. Unconscious. Blood covered his forehead, probably from the impact. But he was breathing. He was alive. For the first time since the apocalypse began. I wasn't alone. I grabbed him and dragged him out of the cabin. It was nearly impossible with the storm throwing us around, but somehow I managed to secure the rope around his body. Slowly, painfully, I started pulling him up toward the ladder. Every second felt like forever. The boat shifted violently behind me. Wood cracked. Metal groaned. The wreck wasn't going to hold much longer. With one final effort, I managed to get him onto the ladder and began climbing back up. Halfway up, a massive wave hit the rig. The boat below was ripped free. I watched it disappear into the darkness, swallowed by the ocean. If I had been a few seconds slower, I would have gone with it. By the time I reached the main platform, I was exhausted. I dragged the man into the control room and closed the door behind me. For hours, the storm continued to rage outside. But inside, everything was quiet. I looked at him as he lay unconscious on the floor. Who was he? How had he survived this long? And the most important question of all, could I trust him? Because in this world, sometimes the living were more dangerous than the dead. He woke up just before sunrise. At first, it was only a slight movement. A weak breath, a twitch of his hand. I had been sitting in the corner of the control room all night, watching him, the wrench still in my grip. The moment his eyes opened, I stood up. He reacted instantly. His body tensed, and he tried to sit up too fast. Pain hit him immediately, and he groaned, grabbing his head. "Easy," I said, keeping my distance. "You're safe, for now." He looked at me, confused, trying to understand where he was. "Where?" His voice was dry, barely working. "Oil rig," I replied. "Middle of nowhere." That seemed to wake him up faster than anything. His eyes widened, and he looked around the control room, noticing the windows, the equipment, the height above the ocean. Then he looked back at me. "You alone?" I hesitated for a second. "Not anymore." He gave a weak, almost nervous smile. "Guess not." I handed him a small bottle of water. He grabbed it like it was gold and drank almost all of it in seconds. "Name?" I asked. "Alex," he said, wiping his mouth. "You?" "Doesn't matter," I replied. "Not anymore." He nodded slowly, like he understood. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy. Two survivors, both wondering the same thing. Can I trust this guy? Finally, he broke it. "You pulled me out of that boat." "Yeah." He shook his head slightly, still trying to process it. "Then I owe you my life." I didn't respond. Because in this world, debts didn't always mean loyalty. "Where did you come from?" I asked. "Coast," he said. "Been moving for weeks. Found the boat, thought I could follow the shoreline, maybe find people." He paused. "Didn't expect that storm." "No one ever did." "And the infected?" I asked. He looked at me, serious now. "They're everywhere." I nodded. "Not just on land," I said quietly. That caught his attention. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, I walked to the window and pointed down toward the lower decks. "They climb." He stared at me, confused at first. Then I saw the moment it clicked in his mind. His expression changed. "That's not possible." "It is," I said. "I've seen it." He slowly stood up, wincing from the pain, and stepped closer to the window. "They come from the ocean," I continued. "Storms bring them. Bodies get pushed against the rig, and some of them wake up." Alex didn't say anything for a while. Then he let out a quiet breath. "This place isn't safe." "No," I said, "it's not." Before he could respond, a loud metallic bang echoed through the rig. Both of us froze. The sound came from below. From the lower decks. We looked at each other instantly. "That wasn't the wind," he said. "I know." Another sound followed. A dragging noise. Then, something heavier, like multiple footsteps. My grip tightened around the wrench. Alex looked around quickly and spotted a metal pipe leaning against the wall. He grabbed it without hesitation. Good. At least he knew how to survive. The sounds below grew louder. More movement. More impacts against metal. And then, a distant growl. Not just one. Many. Alex looked at me, his face now pale. "You said they climb up during storms." "Yeah." He swallowed hard. "There was no storm last night." I felt the same cold realization hit me. If the ocean hadn't brought them, then something else had. Something was happening beneath the oil rig. And this time, it wasn't just a few zombies. The lower deck had never felt more alive, or more dangerous. Alex and I moved carefully down the narrow stairwell, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The faint smell of oil and rust mixed with something far worse, the unmistakable stench of decay. "Stay close," I whispered. He nodded, gripping the metal pipe tightly. Every few steps, the sound of dripping water echoed around us, sounding almost like footsteps, but heavier. When we reached the main lower chamber, I froze. The space was massive, filled with machinery, steel beams, and abandoned equipment. But something else had moved in the shadows. Bodies. Not just one or two, but dozens. They were lying twisted among the machinery, pale and bloated from seawater, some tangled in ropes and cables, others caught in the crevices of the platform's support structures. And they were alive. A low, guttural moan filled the chamber as the nearest one slowly stirred. Its head lifted, eyes dead but focused. Another followed. And another. Alex stiffened beside me. "They multiplied," he said. His voice trembled. "No," I said. "They didn't multiply. They're being brought here." I pointed toward the massive support legs. Something dark and slimy clung to the metal, ropes, nets, and pieces of debris from the ocean. It looked almost intentional, like the rig had become a trap, and the storm wasn't the only delivery system. Then I noticed it, a massive shadow, much bigger than any individual zombie, moving slowly toward the center of the chamber. It was wrapped in fishing nets, seaweed, and debris. Something enormous had been trapped in the wreckage and had now awakened. A low rumble echoed through the metal floor. The creatures on the deck reacted immediately, hissing and stumbling toward the shadow. Alex grabbed my arm. "What is that?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But it's alive, and it's not human." The shadow shifted. Pieces of metal and rope fell off, revealing something unnatural. Limbs twisted at odd angles, flesh fused with debris, a grotesque hybrid of sea and death. It let out a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard, a wet, choking roar that vibrated through the steel beams. The zombies around it surged forward, almost as if drawn by it, climbing over the machinery and reaching for us. "Run!" I shouted. We turned, sprinting toward the ladder back to the upper deck. The chamber was a nightmare of shadows, moans, and the roar of that massive creature. Behind us, the lower deck erupted into chaos. Zombies smashed into machines, some caught in gears, others dragged by the enormous figure moving through the water and debris. We climbed as fast as we could. Every rung of the ladder was slick with seawater, every gust of wind threatening to throw us off balance. When we finally reached the upper deck, I slammed the ladder shut behind us and pulled Alex inside the control room. We were breathing heavily, hearts pounding. Our hands were shaking. Outside, the storm had calmed slightly, but the ocean still raged against the rig. And below, I knew that monstrous shadow was still down there. Waiting. Watching. Day 21 on the rig. The isolation, the storms, the dead, they were nothing compared to what I had just seen. We were no longer just surviving zombies. We were trapped with something far worse. The calm after the storm didn't last. For 3 days, we had patched leaks, reinforced railings, and tried to stay quiet. But the massive shadow from the lower deck didn't disappear. It was still there, somewhere beneath the rig. That night, the wind picked up again. The ocean roared like it was alive, smashing waves against the steel legs. I stayed in the control room, watching, when I heard it, a loud thud on the main deck. Alex and I froze. More thuds followed. Heavy, deliberate. The creature had reached the deck. We grabbed whatever weapons we could, the wrench, the flare gun, a few metal pipes. The smell of rust and seawater filled the air. The first glimpse of it under the dim emergency lights made my stomach drop. The shadow wasn't just a zombie. It was massive, a fusion of corpses, sea debris, and broken machinery. Limbs stuck out at odd angles. Eyes. Hundreds of eyes, glowing faintly in the stormlight. It moved with terrifying intelligence, smashing equipment aside as it advanced. Each step made the entire platform tremble. Alex fired the flare gun first. The red flare lit up the platform, and the creature recoiled slightly. Fire seemed to hurt it, at least a little. I swung the wrench at a smaller part of the mass that tried to grab me. Metal screeched against metal and bone. The impact sent a shower of debris across the deck. The creature roared, a wet, gurgling, inhuman sound, and reached toward the railing. Waves crashed against the rig, and I realized with horror, if it broke through the railing, it could fall into the water and start climbing again anywhere along the legs. Alex, fuel, I shouted. He understood instantly. We had a plan. We poured what remained of the fuel across the deck in front of the creature, creating a narrow corridor. The stench was overwhelming, but adrenaline pushed us forward. I fired the flare gun again. The flames roared to life, catching the massive creature in the middle. Smoke, fire, and screams of metal on metal filled the air. The thing twisted violently, trying to escape the flames, but the corridor kept it confined. For a few tense minutes, it wreathed in fire. Sparks flew from the metal embedded in its body. Then, with a final, guttural roar, it toppled over the railing and fell into the dark water below. The deck trembled as waves smashed against it. Silence returned, heavier than ever. Alex and I collapsed on the floor, exhausted. We had survived, but I knew the truth. This wasn't over. Something had brought that creature here. And if it had allies, the rig would never be safe. We stayed awake the rest of the night, watching the horizon. The ocean seemed calm now. Deceptively calm. And we weren't the only ones watching back. It had been weeks since the last storm. Weeks of tense quiet. The rig had become our home. Not safe, but survivable. We reinforced railings, patched leaks, and rationed the remaining supplies. The flare gun was nearly empty. The wrench and pipes were all we had left for weapons. Alex had grown quieter. He moved efficiently, but something about him still made me uneasy. One evening, while checking the lower deck, I found something that explained it. Old crates, hidden under machinery, letters, photos, and a journal. Alex had a past I didn't know. He wasn't just a survivor washed up by the storm, he had been part of a salvage crew, moving along coastlines, avoiding both infected and desperate humans. The journal spoke of encounters, betrayals, and people he had left behind. I confronted him. "You didn't tell me who you really were," I said. He looked guilty, almost ashamed. "I survived, Chris. That's all that matters. Trust is a luxury we don't have." I didn't argue. I understood. In this world, secrets were survival tools. But one thing became clear: Alex's experience was why we were still alive. That night, we sat on the upper deck, looking out over the endless ocean. "The rig, it won't last forever," I said. He nodded. "We'll survive. Somehow." But survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about adapting. Over the next month, we noticed new signs. The dead had started finding different ways onto the rig: small debris, floating wreckage, even the occasional small boat carried by the current. The ocean was still delivering threats, even in calm weather. We reinforced the ladders, added traps with spare cables, and used flares to scare any climbers away. Every day was a test. Every week felt like a year. By day 120, the rig felt more like a fortress, but a fragile one. Every storm could destroy it. Every wave could deliver the dead. And through it all, Alex's past remained a shadow over our survival. I didn't know if I could fully trust him. But in this world, trust was relative. Better to survive together than alone. Six months had passed since that first storm brought chaos to the rig. The oil platform had become our home, our fortress, our prison. We had settled into a routine, scavenging, reinforcing, watching the horizon for signs of storms or floating corpses. The ocean was a silent predator, delivering both food and death. But nothing could prepare us for what happened that morning. I was inspecting the southern ladder, one of the few weak points on the rig, when I heard it, a metallic screech, loud enough to pierce the morning calm. Alex was already behind me, wrench in hand. "What now?" he shouted over the wind. I didn't answer. My flashlight cut across the deck and landed on the ladder. Bodies. Several drowned zombies were climbing. Not from the ocean, they had found a weak gap in our defenses. They were organized in their own grotesque way, scaling the rig with unnatural persistence. "Shit," I muttered. "They're smarter now." We fought back as best as we could. Wrenches, pipes, even the last of the flare cartridges were used. But the numbers overwhelmed us. One by one, the creatures broke through the railings and scattered across the main deck. Then Alex made a choice. He grabbed a leaking fuel hose and poured it across the main stairwell. "We either stop them here, or they'll take the whole rig," he yelled. I nodded, understanding. Survival required sacrifices. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," I said. The flare gun ignited the fuel. Flames shot up, creating a blazing barrier. Zombies screamed and burned, some stumbling into the ocean below. Others were trapped against the deck, writhing in agony. But the fire spread faster than we expected. Smoke filled the deck, stinging our eyes. We had to retreat to the control room before the flames reached the fuel storage. We made it, barely. The rig creaked under the heat, metal groaning as the fire consumed debris. We watched through the windows as smoke and flames consumed part of the main deck. The zombies were mostly gone, but at a cost. Our safe zone was smaller, our resources scarcer, and the rig's integrity weakened. Alex looked at me, face grim. "We survived. But the ocean isn't done with us." I nodded. We both knew the truth. The rig was no longer just a home. It was a battleground. And every day we survived, the ocean, the storms, and the dead were testing us. For the first time in months, I wondered if we would last the entire year. The rig had become a fragile giant of steel and oil, groaning under months of storms, fires, and relentless attacks. Every gust of wind felt like it could tear us off the platform. Every wave seemed larger than before. Alex and I moved cautiously. Supplies were low, and the flare gun was empty. Only wrenches, pipes, and our instincts remained. That night, a new threat appeared. From the shadows below, I heard the scraping, dragging sound I had learned to fear. But this time, it was accompanied by something new, screams. Not human, not fully dead, but a horrifying mix of both. I grabbed a pipe and ran toward the sound with Alex close behind. On the deck, dozens of zombies had managed to climb the side again, taking advantage of weakened railings. Some were trapped in twisted metal, others moving freely. The storm had started again, a smaller one this time, wind cutting through the platform and rain soaking us to the bone. We fought as best we could, swinging and pushing, but exhaustion made each strike slower, heavier. One of the creatures grabbed Alex, pulling him toward the railing. I hit it with all my strength, sending it over the edge, but not before Alex's shoulder was scratched, a deep, bloody mark. He grimaced, pain and anger mixed together. "We can't keep doing this like this," he shouted. I understood immediately. Months of survival had taken their toll. The rig wasn't just a home anymore, it was a trap. Alex revealed the plan he had been keeping secret. "There's a storage container at the far east end," he said. "It's untouched. Supplies, food, maybe even medicine. If we can make it there, we might actually survive the rest of the year." I nodded. It was dangerous, but we had no other choice. The next morning, we prepared. Every step counted. Every swing of the wrench, every movement through the slippery metal deck could be our last. As we moved across the rig, the ocean crashed beneath us, waves hitting the support legs like giant fists. Zombies tried to climb, but the fire from earlier had scarred them. Only the desperate, persistent ones remained. We reached the container. Inside, I found dry rations, tools, and a few medical supplies. Enough to give us hope, enough to make it to the final months. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. The rig was still dangerous. The ocean was still a threat. But for now, we had a chance. And in this world, a chance was everything. The ocean had grown wild again. The sky blackened with heavy clouds, and the wind tore at the rig with a fury I hadn't seen in months. This was no ordinary storm, it was a force of nature, determined to test everything we had survived so far. Alex and I secured what we could. Cables were tied, doors locked, and debris moved to prevent the worst. But the rig creaked ominously under the increasing pressure. Then the first signs of the dead appeared. Bodies, carried by massive waves, smashed against the rig. The lower decks were swarming with zombies, some climbing ropes and weak ladders. Unlike before, they moved with a terrifying, coordinated persistence, as if the storm had taught them to find new ways. "Brace yourself," I shouted to Alex. We fought with everything left, wrenches, pipes, even heavy boxes hurled at the creatures. But the storm wasn't just bringing the dead. Metal beams twisted under the wind, some railings gave way, and the rig groaned like it was alive and angry. A huge wave struck the platform, knocking Alex off his feet. I grabbed his arm just in time, pulling him back onto the deck. He gasped, soaked and exhausted, but alive. The fire traps we had used before were useless in the rain. We were forced to improvise, swinging pipes and using brute strength to push zombies back into the waves. Hours passed in a blur of wind, rain, and metal-on-metal clashes. Each moment felt like a lifetime. At one point, a massive piece of the rig, a support beam, cracked and swung dangerously close to us. We jumped, narrowly avoiding being crushed. By dawn, the storm began to calm, leaving the rig battered and partially destroyed. Many zombies had been swept away by the waves, but some remained, scattered across the remaining decks. Alex collapsed against a railing. "We made it, again," he said. I looked out at the horizon. The rig was still standing, but barely. Every storm, every wave, every attack had left its mark. We had survived 340 days on this cursed platform. And now, the final month was ahead, the last 25 days of our year-long nightmare. I knew one thing: surviving the final stretch would require every ounce of strength, every bit of cunning, and complete trust in each other. The rig was more than steel and oil. It was a battlefield, a prison, and a home. And for 365 days, it would define us. One full year. 365 days on this rig. 365 days of storms, blood, fire, and silence. The ocean was calm now, almost eerily so. The sky burned orange and pink with the dawn, and for the first time in months, I could see the horizon clearly. But the calm was deceptive. The rig was scarred, metal twisted, beams cracked. Every step reminded me that it could collapse at any moment. Alex and I moved carefully across the upper deck, surveying the remnants of the platform. We had survived countless storms, zombie attacks, fires, and injuries. Every day had been a test of endurance, of patience, of willpower. Then we heard it, the faint scraping sound from below. One last challenge. The remaining zombies had learned from every encounter. They were fewer now, slower, but still persistent. Alex gripped a pipe tightly. I held the wrench. Together, we faced them one final time. The battle was intense, shorter but no less deadly. With coordinated strikes, makeshift traps, and sheer determination, we pushed the last of the climbing undead into the ocean. The rig trembled violently as if protesting the fight, and I realized something terrifying: it wouldn't survive another storm like the last one. I looked at Alex. We made it. A full year. But the rig, it won't last forever. He nodded, exhaustion written on his face. We survived. That's what matters. For a long moment, we stood in silence, listening to the waves lap against the steel legs, smelling the smoke and salt in the air. The rig was battered. We were battered. But we were alive. And in this world, that was everything. We didn't know what the next day would bring: storms, the ocean, or even more of the dead. But for 365 days, we had survived together, against everything. As the sun rose higher, its light cutting across the battered platform, I finally allowed myself a deep breath. A year of isolation, fear, and survival had ended. The rig had been our prison, our battlefield, our home. And we had endured it all. I looked at Alex and smiled. We survived, I said. Yes, he replied. We did. For the first time in a year, hope felt real again. 365 days. 1 year alone on this rig, surrounded by the ocean, storms, and the undead. Every day was a fight. Every night was a test. But in the end, we survived. Not because we were lucky, not because the world spared us, but because we refused to give up. The rig may not last forever, the ocean may still bring horrors, and the dead will never stop coming. But what matters is this: for 1 full year, we endured. We adapted. We survived. And as the sun rises over the battered steel of this platform, I know one thing for certain: survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about finding strength you didn't know you had, and refusing to surrender, even when the world is against you.